All right, friends, who is the Babylon Bee? What is their strategy for culture? What's the story of how they started? And what are their suggestions for becoming woke? This is a topic we're going to have some fun with today. I have managing editor Joel Berry with me today, and we're going to unpack some of these ideas. Joel, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's really great to talk to you in person. Been a fan for a long time.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I got to be on with some of your colleagues, drove up to the offices and realized
Uh-huh.
that you live in Ohio, so we didn't get to meet in person. So, huge
That's right.
fan of what you guys do, but let's just say you're pretty darn controversial as well. And we're going to get into the strategy. I suspect that's a part of it, but just in case somebody listening is like, I kind of know who the Babylon Bee is, but I'm not sure. When somebody asks you, what do you do? How do you explain what the Babylon Bee is?
Usually when someone asks what I do, I say that I get paid to write silly memes all day. That doesn't quite describe what we do at the Babylon Bee. But the Babylon Bee is a Christian news satire site. Started about 4 years ago by a guy named Adam Ford. And we are very similar. And in fact, we were inspired by The Onion, what The Onion does.
Mm,
So we write fake news stories and satirical fake news stories in like a very dry AP style, with kind of a punchy headline, sometimes a funny Photoshop, and we're making jokes on anything from church humor, that only people in the church would get, to
okay.
politics, culture, music, movies, really kind of anything that's going on that day. We're looking for something funny to say about it.
You mentioned the onion, and I was telling you beforehand that I have a good friend of mine, an apologist my audience would probably recognize, so I will not give him a shout out because he started a talk with an article from the Onion, and he thought it was real. This is over a decade ago. So, yeah, he ate crow, let's just say. But
uh,
compare and contrast what they do and how it's similar and or different with what you guys do at the Babylon Bee.
yeah, so Adam, when he started the site, he kind of got the seed of the idea for the Babylon Bee when he came across an Onion article that read, it was after the Obergefell decision, after they redefined the meaning of marriage at the Supreme Court. And the Onion article was really clever. It was something to the effect of, four Supreme Court justices suddenly realized that they will now be the villains in a future Oscar-winning movie. You know,
Okay.
and like you read that, and obviously as a Christian, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with their point of view, but you
Hmm.
kind of respect the joke, and you kind of can't help but laugh a little bit at the cleverness of it. And so Adam thought, well, why aren't we doing this? This is something I feel like we could be
Hmm.
doing, um, because jokes and humor have a way of communicating truth that is more disarming, that
Hmm.
can really get straight to the point, sometimes faster than a long think piece or op-ed or best-selling book can do. And so he conceived of this idea, and sent out for writers, for ideas, for headline pitches. That's how Kyle Mann got involved. He eventually became the
Hmm.
editor-in-chief of the Babylon Bee, and a lot of what you see on the Babylon Bee is Kyle Mann's brain. I mean, a lot of it
Okay.
did come from him. And I came along 2 years later. um, anyway, as far as comparing it to the Onion, um, you know very similar. The What we try, obviously different points of view. The Onions are leftists, and they have a point of view, um, and we are conservative Christians. We have a point of view. I think what we try to do slightly different, or maybe go beyond what the Onion does, is that a lot of satire in the secular world is, it's strictly deconstructionist satire. You're
Okay.
ridiculing something and taking apart and showing how ridiculous it is. We want to do that with bad ideas, with things that we see that are wrong or foolish. But we hope, and we really want to go beyond that, to point to something. We don't want to just deconstruct the bad idea. We want to point to the truth and point to where our
Okay.
hope is. And so we anything we satirize, sometimes we're really savage, sometimes we're brutal, but we always try to keep that hope in front of us, and we always try to make sure that the people that we're, or the ideas that we're ridiculing, there, we don't want any hate or malice to be behind it. And we hope that comes across, that that there's a joy or a jovialness
Hmm.
behind it, and not an anger, or a rage behind what we write. Um, and sometimes I think sometimes it might get misinterpreted because we just live in an outrage culture right now.
Sure.
But we're having a blast. We're just having fun.
You're enjoying it. Those of you who just joined us, there's a new book that's just coming out called The Babylon Bee Guide to Wokeness. I got to tell you, I was in, oh, there's the official copy. I was
Yeah,
in
we got
tears.
it isn't in color. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, there you go. I was in tears. I kept interrupting my wife, being like, oh, you got to look at this one. You got to look at this one. She's like, stop. I'm like, yeah, but it's funny. Well, it definitely doesn't come through that there's kind of an anger behind it, but you guys push limits, that's for sure. In a culture that's going the opposite direction, it's like, don't offend. It's almost like you're leaning in the opposite direction. We're going to come back to how you
Yeah.
kind of square that with the Christian faith, but let's get specific of what you're aiming to do with satire. So one of the examples in here, I paused, and you were comparing how deadly hand grenades are with microaggressions. So I could guess what you're like, microaggression, always deadly. Hand grenade, you might lose a limb, but there's a good chance you'll survive. And clearly to me, I'm
Right.
looking at this going, it's complete exaggeration to make a point. Like, walk me through the thinking of what you want to accomplish with an example like that.
Yeah. I think when you get caught up in the rhetoric of our outrage culture, microaggressions, the way things happen online, um, it's easy. It's really easy to get swept away by that. Introducing the hand grenade is just like a little perspective. It's kind of our way of saying, well, there are worse things that can happen to you besides someone, saying something that offends your sensibilities slightly. Um, you know, it's a lot of what we did in the book was, we have exaggeration in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's kind of written from the perspective of a woke person. Think of a woke person having written this, that maybe is very not self-aware, and maybe a little too honest about what wokeness is, and sincerely believes this to the point of, like, they actually believe that microaggressions are worse than getting hit by a hand grenade. So
Hmm. Okay, I got it. So that makes sense. It's almost like you're using the absurdity of this to try to get people's attention. So is the goal of the Babylon Bee, is it, since you're Christians, is it more, are there spiritual goals in terms of truth? Is it political goals in terms of truth? Or is it just we're pushing back on anything we think is false in culture and in the church today?
yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's
Mm,
we're really trying to push back against anything false. Our goals are twofold. We want to make people laugh, because laughter in and of itself is a good. God created laughter.
mm,
God created humor, and that's something that is good. It's a good part of creation that we want to honor and
mm,
help hopefully extend to people. But yes, we do have an agenda, and that hopefully being the truth. Now, um, you know, we can be partisans from time to time. We do have a political point of view, but we do very much try to skewer both sides when that is needed. There is hypocrisy in both sides. There is
mm,
hypocrisy in ourselves.
mm,
um, I think we need to realize that, um, all of humanity is in the same boat. We are all sinners. We are all hypocrites. We all fail,
mm,
and something about that is funny. Sin is missing the mark.
mm,
It's like slipping on a banana peel. We all think so much of ourselves,
mm,
and we think we're so great, but we mess up all the time. And there's something comedic about that, and so I think in bringing that out, in bringing out some of the hypocrisies and the silliness of human behavior
mm,
and philosophies, we are pointing to the truth, and that's really our ultimate goal.
mm. So, how do you come up with content? I mean, do you just scroll through the news headlines? Do you listen to podcasts? Like you just sit there and like think, like what's the skill? If you were going to train somebody to do
Yeah.
what you do, what would you tell them to get better at creating satire?
Well, that's a good question. You know, you do have to consume a lot of media. Um, you know, I'm reading a lot of news. I'm on social media a lot. You got to kind of be tapped into what's going on. That's important. But that's not where the creative part comes in. So you're not going to come up with great ideas scrolling through Twitter. At some point, you do have to turn that stuff off. And whether it's, you know, getting on a computer or with a pencil and paper, just brainstorming ideas. And a lot of satire is connecting things. So you might connect, you know, the controversy and around public school curriculums to, you know, what's happening in and out burger, you know, like something that you wouldn't think of a connection being there. If you can find a funny or ironic connection, and turn it into a joke, that usually works pretty well.
Hmm.
um, it's it is it's ultimately a numbers game. In order to write good satire, you have to write a lot of bad satire. So
Huh.
um, for every one headline we're publishing, there's probably 80 or 90 headlines that were thrown in the trash. We pitch a
Wow.
lot. Yeah.
Wow.
So and when you're doing it together, so we have a team of part-time writers, 5 or 6 guys that we're all in this group together, and we pitch together. We can riff off each other. So one guy will come up with an idea, maybe it's not perfectly stated. Another one of us will riff maybe a little better phrasing of it, and the idea is to kind of lean that joke down to its essence, cut out all the fat, and it's really kind of a 1-2 punch. What you want to do is set someone up. You know, you
Hmm.
give them a kind of a normal scenario as they're reading through. It's everything sounds normal, and then you kind of pull the rug out from underneath them with the last couple words, where the whole meaning of the joke changes in those couple words. That's the punchline. That's where you kind of push a little air out of your nose and laugh while you're reading.
So if you had to guess, when I see an image scrolling through Instagram, how much time do you think goes into each one of those, from the art, from the idea to the script writing? Is it 5 hours? Is it 10 hours? What would be your best guess? Because they just scroll. I mean, I'm seeing them all the time. I feel like these guys are just, coming up with them every few minutes, but there's obviously a backlog process to it.
Yeah, we do a lot. I mean, a lot of it is written that day,
Hmm.
sometimes minute by minute, because, you know, sometimes we have to respond to big news events as they happen. Um, if we're responding to a news cycle thing that has come up, um, you know, and we're just doing a Photoshop of maybe, you know, a screenshot from the news with another inset picture, usually those are pretty quick. You know, we'll get those
Okay.
done in, you know, in 15 minutes to a half an hour. Um, the more elaborate ones that require like this fantastical Photoshop where, you know, like, you know, Trump
Right, right.
sneaking back into the White House inside a Trojan ice cream cone, you know, like like that's where, like, I love it when I send those jokes to our Photoshop guy and I'm like, okay, I need you to Photoshop a picture of Trump inside a big fake ice cream cone, and they're dragging it into the White House. Like, what do you want? Those ones obviously take a little bit longer, you know.
Sure.
Sometimes they're not worth it, but we have fun doing it anyway.
Here's a great question. I've got a million more for you, but I'm going to jump right to this one from Susan Morales. She says, let me pull this over here. Uh, is sensitivity involved in the process when writing satire of political topics that the church may disagree on, like immigration and racism?
Ooh. Um, no, not really. um, you know,
Okay.
we do try to be sensitive when it comes to, you know, tragedies, things that happen. You know, if people die, we I kind of have an accountability board that I like. If I think a headline is a little bit insensitive or on the edge, I'll send it to them and ask them what they think. Are a few times that we've crossed that line.
Mm,
Now, when it comes to issues that the church disagrees on, um, you know, we have a lot of, you know, lighthearted jokes, you know, about Calvinists and Arminians and people who are
sure.
young earthers and old earthers and things like that. And that's all. I mean, I think both sides can laugh at those. Those are all in good fun. I think where the the anger or the rancor comes, or the angry reactions come from, is when we, like Susan said, when we make jokes about race in the church, immigration, some of these cultural issues related to kind of the woke movement as it plays out in the church. We can be pretty straightforward and pretty brutal with those, because we do
Hmm.
feel very strongly about the effect that that's having on the church. And so,
Hmm.
um, on those issues, we are pretty divisive, and unapologetically so.
Hmm. So we were having a chat beforehand. You made a distinction between being a comedian and writing comedy. I had not really thought about this because I'm not either, but I know there's a difference between teaching, a difference between speaking and debating, and they take very different skill sets. So what's
Right.
the difference between writing comedy and doing comedy?
Yeah. Well, I don't do comedy. I write comedy. I'm definitely not a comedian. If
Hmm.
I could never do crowd work or stand up, if you ask me. Um, Writing comedy, I think, is equal parts art and science. There is an art and an imaginativeness to it, but it also is very much kind of an engineering task. You're wordsmithing.
Mm-hmm.
You're being very precise with how you put syllables and words together just so it hits right. And a lot of us writers are, if we were to try to tell jokes in front of an audience, I don't think it would go very well. We're not like,
Hmm.
we're not necessarily people persons, people.
Hmm.
um and so that is a very specific skill set, what we do.
Hmm.
Comedy, I have an incredible amount of respect for people who have the courage to do stand-up comedy, because not only do you have to write the jokes, but you have to be up in front of a crowd, and you have to be able to read the crowd and know exactly how long to pause before a punchline,
Hmm.
exactly what tone to deliver that punchline in. And then, a lot of comedians, they have to go and do open mics for weeks and weeks and weeks to test out their material, and sometimes bomb, in order to fine tune their material. And bombing in a comedy club, I can't even. That's the worst thing I can possibly imagine. So, even comedians, I will never insult a comedian, even if I don't like their comedy or I don't think they're funny. I have a lot of respect for what
Hmm.
they do. They're amazing.
Hmm. When was the first moment that you or someone on the team realized, wow, with the Babylon Bee, we're on to something big here? Was it a first interview, or I think the USA Today did a coverage a while ago? Was it an image that went viral? Like, what was some of those early moments that were like, we have hit something here that's special?
Well, probably the first moment would have come before I came on board with the Babylon Bee, but Kyle talks about this a lot. Was really our first viral article, and it was a church joke, and it was Holy Spirit unable to move through congregation after fog machine breaks. And you get that right away, right? Like, if you're a Christian, you know what that joke is about. And I think we knew we were onto something when people just started sharing our articles like crazy, and
Mm,
going, oh my gosh, like, this is me, this is you, like, I've seen this before, I relate to this. We had really struck a nerve with Christians who had really never been lampooned in a good natured way before. You kind of have, like, Ned Flanders from The Simpsons, who's that caricature of a Christian. You have
sure.
examples in media, and that are usually not very flattering. But I think for a lot of people, this was the first time they had seen comedy that kind of poked fun at them a little bit in a good natured way, that
Mm,
didn't hate them, that didn't despise them. And so it really took off from there. I think for me, when I came on, when I I realized we had maybe hit a whole nother level when one of our articles again went viral. And this was, I think, something to the effect of LeBron James wears a lace collar to honor RBG. And this is after RBG died. And so we had a picture of
mm,
LeBron James wearing kind of like a judge's
got it.
lace collar. And what was funny about that one was, it it went viral on the left, because
Hmm.
all people on the left believed it. They thought it was real. So it was shared by the editor in chief of like Vogue magazine in New York. It went
Oh my
viral in
goodness.
Paris. People were so inspired. It was also our first article to go viral on LinkedIn. Like we, like I didn't know viral,
Okay.
articles could go viral on LinkedIn, but everyone loved it and was so inspired. And I almost felt bad knowing that, like at some point, these people who thought it was so inspiring were going to be let down, knowing it was satire. That was kind of when I felt like we were over the target because
Hmm.
um, we were satirizing something that was just believable enough to where people actually thought it could happen, you
Hmm.
know. Um, and a lot of our satire has come true. It's we call them prophecies. Obviously, they're not prophecies,
Hmm.
but when you skirt that close to the truth, sometimes some of our stuff actually ends up happening a few months or years later. And so that's kind of what tells me that we're kind of going in the right
Yeah.
direction. That we're close enough to the truth where it makes sense. People believe it.
If you can think of one, give me an example, one that did come true, that was posted earlier and then came true. And I know this wasn't yours, but I think of like The Simpsons had Donald Trump as president like decades ago or years ago, and it happens. It's kind of like, wow, that's very interesting satire. Can
Oh
you think
yeah.
of one that came true?
Oh my goodness. Well, okay, yeah. Uh, so we had in 2018 we had like First Baptist Church of Dallas members melt golden jewelry down into towering Donald Trump statue, and then a few years later at the CPAC conference they actually made a giant golden Donald Trump statue and wheeled it through the CPAC convention.
Gosh.
um, we had
Wow.
let's see. Biden proposes $2 trillion bill to study what's causing inflation rates to rise. A few weeks later, Biden in a speech said that his multi-trillion-dollar spending packages would reduce inflation.
Hmm.
Um, let's see. We uh, we prophesied that the Del Rio border agents on the border would have their horses taken away from them,
Mm.
and that they would be forced to skip around banging empty halves of coconuts together. I think that was our joke. And a few weeks later, sure enough, they were. Psaki in our press conference confirmed that horses will no longer be used in Del Rio,
Yeah.
Texas. So um, I could go on, but yeah,
Sure.
it
Sure.
happens. It happens a lot.
I get the point. Do you have a personal favorite? Like if you're going to print one out and put on your wall that you've come up with, it's just like, you know what? I'm pretty proud of this one. This was fun. This nailed it. Not so much in terms of numbers, that could be your
Mm.
criteria, but just one you're like, that was pretty awesome.
I couldn't tell you. Um,
Okay.
I well, and here's why. A lot of our articles are a real group effort. I mean, there are some
Mm.
that are fully a product of me, where I did the Photoshop, the article, came up with the idea and everything. But usually, how it happens is you have one guy who pitches a version of the joke, another guy who pitches a better version of the joke. We choose that version, and then like a third guy comes and writes the copy, and a fourth guy is doing the Photoshop. So it is very much a group effort. We all pitch in. It's hard for me to like hang my hat on one joke and be like, that was mine and I did a good job.
That's fair.
Um, but and honestly, we do so much. I mean, we release 8 articles a day. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so
Wow.
we're writing 8 articles a day, and
Gosh.
I just lose track. There's just so much.
That makes sense. So of
Yeah,
those 8 a day, I mean there's hundreds. Has
yeah.
the Babylon Bee ever taken one down because of outcry and thought, maybe we went a little too far in this one
Mm.
and backpedaled?
Um, we have never taken one down because of
Hmm.
outcry or controversy. Um, who we did take one down about Ravi Zacharias.
Mm.
Um, and this was after everything came out after his death. It was very sad. Just didn't seem appropriate for the site. So I think
Got it.
that's probably the only one in our history that we actually did take down. Usually, when there's a lot of outcry over one of our articles, um, it it adds to the joke, and we'll double down and have fun with it. But yeah, we have crossed the line a couple times. I sometimes I even get texts from my dad like, "Oh, this was a little bit. I don't
Wow.
know about this one," and I'll always tell him, "Oh, I didn't write that one. I didn't."
Of course, of
um,
course.
but I think over the years we've gotten hopefully a little better. At knowing where that line is. We don't want to lose sight of what the goal is, and
Mm,
get caught in a bunch of anger and controversy. That would be counterproductive. So we're always conscious of how a headline is going to be
mm.
interpreted or misinterpreted. We're always try to be careful with that.
How does the team deal with criticism? Because I've been doing this YouTube channel probably a year and a half with more intentionality, and it's awesome, great
Yeah.
influence. I enjoy it, but with that has come just daily barrage of feedback, positive and negative, and it's
Yeah.
not easy to balance. Like you can just read so much, and it can be exhausting emotionally.
Yes.
But I also want to take criticism fairly and say, you know what, I got to do better. I want people to feel like they're listened to. So I'm personally always trying to figure out how do I best
Hmm.
deal with this, just stewarding the time that I have. How do
Hmm.
you guys deal with that? Do you just have thick skin and laugh it off? Or do you sit down sometimes and talk these
Yeah.
through? Do you ignore it, delete it? What's that like?
That's a good question, because I remember the very first article that I wrote. I used to be a part-time writer, and the very first article that got published on the site that I had written. I remember I used to obsessively scroll through the comments, and what do people think?
Mm.
How are people reacting to this joke? And the very first article I wrote, I remember there was one comment. Most of the comments were positive, right? But there was that one comment that was like, um, yeah, this isn't one of your funnier ones. It's just like kind of a, it's like, oh my God. I was like, I quit. I'm done. I can't, I'm a disgrace. You know, it's so funny how our minds, can scroll through 50
Yeah.
good comments, and we immediately go to that bad comment. And that's what our minds and our souls choose to,
Mm-hmm.
to focus on. I think a lot of that's the enemy, that the,
Sure.
the enemy wants us to think that. But, I think over time it's gotten easier. Numbers helps, having coworkers and friends alongside you who are doing this with you
Mm.
helps as well. It's not like a one man show. So if we get made fun of, or we get a lot of, like the Babylon Bee's not funny. It's boomer humor, which we love boomer humor. Come on. Um, uh, we we tend to you got to be self-deprecating. I think it's healthy to join in with some of the criticism or the insults and say, yeah, that's that's just another version of the joke that we've told 12 times
Mm.
already, and we recycled it. You're right. Yeah, that's what we do.
Mm.
And so you just you can't take yourself too seriously. um you have to remember, like, ultimately, like, who we are before God. I mean, we are all
Amen.
pretty silly, inadequate people, and
Mm.
just the fact that God allows us to do anything for Him in His name, in His service on this earth, is an incredible grace,
Mm.
and mercy. And so, I think perspective. It's just perspective helps. You just remember who you are, remember who God is. Um, the internet trolls are internet trolls, and they're probably a lot angrier and more miserable than you are.
Mm.
And from there you can, move on.
So you mentioned your faith, how that gives you perspective. Let's talk about how you square satire with the Christian faith. Like, did Jesus
Yeah.
use satire? There's a lot of riddles in the Bible. There's arguably some humor. How do you square satire, which sometimes is punchy and can feel like we're getting a laugh at somebody else's expense,
Mhm.
with biblical teaching? How do you and the team make sense of that seeming tension, at least?
Yeah. Well, we do think there's some good, strong examples from Scripture of what would you call it, sanctified sarcasm or sanctified satire.
Okay.
The Elijah and the prophets of Baal is a classic one.
Okay.
As they're trying to, as the prophets are dancing around, trying to, and I love this picture in my head. I just imagine these guys
Hmm.
just like dancing around, oh, like, please hear us, Baal. um, and the prophet of God is just is mocking them and mocking their God. He's
Hmm.
saying, like, maybe your God, went out to eat. Maybe he's on the toilet. Like, maybe if you just yell louder, something will happen.
Hmm.
Some of the other funny examples from Isaiah, and these aren't typically jokes at someone else's expense. They're usually jokes about, ridiculing an idea or ridiculing idolatry. I love the way Isaiah mocks idolatry. He'll say, make sure and nail your idol to the ground, because a horse might walk by and knock it over on its face. Just kind of mocking the
Hmm.
idea that people would put their faith and trust in this pathetic little, idol of stone. Um, that's a lot, I think, of what we do is we're mocking idols, whether that idol is Donald Trump, whether that idol is your political ideology, whether your idol is your church denomination, or material goods, whatever it be. We try to mock that. Jesus, was another example of, he had some very strong words for the religious leaders of the time. And obviously that's Jesus. He probably has much more right to say those things, than we do. But
Hmm.
yeah, there are some examples from Scripture. And I think the important thing, as you're laughing or you're mocking, um, the target is important. It's important to consider the target. I don't think jokes should be at someone else's expense,
Hmm.
so much as ridiculing ideas or idolatry. Now, sometimes we joke. We will mock or ridicule people in positions of power and hypocrisy. For example, we'll get jokes sometimes for making fun of President Joe Biden, and his mental abilities or dementia, things like that.
Okay.
Um, you know, that's I mean, that's a discussion I'm willing to have. I think Christians fall on either side of that issue. The way we see it is, this is the most powerful man on the planet.
Hmm.
Essentially, this is the president of the United States of America. He has tremendous power, um, and we I there's an Egyptian satirist. I forget what his name is. His name escapes me at the moment, but he said something like, satire is important because it reminds us that our leaders are not gods. you
Hmm.
know um, what a lot of people do, when they follow political leaders or even religious leaders, is they elevate
Hmm.
them way beyond what they should. And satire can have the effect of kind of knocking them down a peg or two
Hmm.
and reminding everyone that, no, these people are human just like we are. They're fallible. They have weaknesses just like us, and we shouldn't elevate them to these levels of worship that we often do, that human beings naturally do.
Hmm. Here's an interesting question that relates to the one about the Bible and satire. It's from Keith Grimes. He says, "Real question. Do you guys think Jesus was funny?" Now, I'll give my 2 cents as you jump in.
Yeah.
I think there's some indications, even with Jesus cursing the fig tree, that when you understand the context and the culture at that time, there was a kind of humor behind it. So I think he was, if he's fully human and God made us with a sense of humor, he
Hmm.
clearly had joy and had humor. I can't imagine he was just this wooden walk around giving speeches the way sometimes we portray him in film.
Yeah.
So my sense is we have hints in the scripture, but when we understand that humor is a gift from God and how he made us, I think
Yeah.
Jesus would genuinely have been funny. What do you think?
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. That's why I can't wait to meet him someday. you
Hmm.
know, I I wish there was an example in the New Testament of Jesus like telling a one liner or a dad joke or something.
Yes,
you
I
know,
agree.
but I am sure that he would have done that. It's possible maybe those jokes didn't make it into the scripture because culture and humor would have been so different back then. It just wouldn't translate today the
Hmm.
same way. But yeah, I absolutely think he was funny. I'm sure
Hmm.
he was.
So I want you to tell me if you think I folded or not on this one. There was this is probably 5 or 6 years ago, a just kind of a meme going around. I don't know if mocking is the right word, but taking affirming theology and replacing it with idolatry, a different sin, and saying, hey, if we take the arguments used here, you could actually affirm a kind of idolatry. And it was satire. And I thought it was kind of funny. I retweeted it. And I had a
Hmm.
buddy who is in favor of affirming theology contact me and he goes, hey, there's a lot of us who just find this hurtful and
Hmm.
offensive. Would you take it down? And I thought about it, went back and forth. I was like, you know what? For me, for the sake of relationship, if this somebody that I cares about finds it hurtful, I'm going to err on the side of taking it down for the sake of that relationship.
Hmm.
Would you say A, McDowell folded, keep it up? B, we have different ways we judge these things and different roles and shouldn't all look
Mm.
at it the same? Or C, some other option?
Um, yeah, my first instinct on that would be that I think that God will probably lead different people different ways depending on their roles, and I think
Okay.
you have to do what's right in your conscience before God.
Okay.
I think there are people who God has called to be the firebrands, and people who God has called to be kind of the winsome, I don't know what, for lack of a, I don't know, can't think of a better word, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I I think I've kind of evolved on this over the years a little bit. I think in the past I probably would have taken something like that down.
Hmm.
Um, I think today, um, considering where we're at in our culture and the way things are going, I think that there are already plenty of people
Hmm.
self-censoring and taking things down for the sake of just keeping the peace, um, and not making trouble for themselves. And I think that um, if I was to come to a situation like that today, I would probably keep it up with a lot of
Hmm.
cringing. I'd be like, oh, I want to take this down.
Hmm.
But almost just like for the sake of principle, thinking like I can't I can't this is what I believe, right? I just posted something that I think is true, and to to take it down would feel like a compromise to me. Um, Not that compromise is always bad, but
Sure.
um, I think I have evolved a little bit on that over the years, just because I feel like the moment that we're in now calls for a lot of boldness,
Hmm.
and boldness has gotten a lot harder and a lot more
Hmm.
costly. So, so yeah, that's my long-winded answer.
That was a very political, gracious, non-Babylon Bee way of saying I blew it. So I will take that from you. Uh, hey, let's talk about your book a little bit. Your whole team wrote this again, not in color. Why don't you hold your copy up? It's called the Babylon
Yeah.
Bee Guide to Wokeness. And honestly, like I told you, I was in tears reading this and just sharing it with my wife. Like I'm gonna go back to this a lot. But tell me in general, how concerned are you about wokeness? Because conservative Christians will talk about, the growth of Islam or
Mm.
secularism or, some other topic. How do you and your team rank woke on the area of concern compared to
Mm.
other areas?
Um, I think that there's two answers to that. There's kind of a short term and a long term answer, and I'll explain what I mean. In the short term, I'm very concerned about it because I think it's going to do a lot of damage,
Hmm.
especially in the church. I think wokeness, traces its roots to liberation theology, and before that, Soviet communism and Marxism. We see what liberation theology did in South America, to the Christian, to the mostly Christian nations down there. You see the suffering, the human tragedy in places like Venezuela, for example. I think that if wokeness is con- continues to grow and gain power in our culture, that we are potentially heading for some of that tragedy.
Hmm.
Um, Now, in the long term, am I concerned about it? No, because
Okay.
um, in the long term, um, you know, okay, I'll explain it this way. the Babylon Bee was it's named, or its name is inspired by the Babylonian exile. Israel was in captivity in Babylon. They saw their whole way of life come crashing down in front of them. Everything was gone. The temple was ransacked. They were hauled away. They were put out, given new clothes, told to worship false gods. And then not only that, but Daniel saw the Babylonian Empire fall, the greatest empire that had ever existed on the face of the planet up to that point. He saw that fall, and the rise of the Medes, the Persians, and that later fell. And so Daniel had this incredible perspective to where
Mm,
he saw human kingdoms and ways of life rise and fall and disappear like the wind. And relate that to where we're at in America. Some of us think that America's always been here and it always will be here. Well,
mm,
it's not. um, America isn't what is going to stand the test of time. Christ and his kingdom is what will stand the test of time. So in the long term, may wokeness do damage? Yes, possibly. Um, but nothing will overthrow the kingdom of God and the church of
mm,
God. There will be
mm,
people who fall away tragically. There will be damage that's done, but God will continue to build his church through persecution, through suffering, through whatever may come in the future. And for that reason, I'm just along for the ride, and I'm trusting in my Savior, and I'm
mm,
having a blast laughing at it. You can,
mm,
when you have that, it's that perspective. It gives you a joy, even as you
mm,
watch what seems like the end of the world, which it's not. But to a lot of conservatives, a lot of Christians, it seems like the end of the world, the end of our way of life. Um, Remember why we're here. Remember what's important. Remember who we serve. Um, our hope isn't in all this stuff. Our
mm.
hope is in God.
So you may have answered this, but I was curious if you sense some kind of momentum pushing against wokeness. Like obviously the Dave Chappelle special,
Yeah.
and Netflix not taking it down or canceling him.
Hmm.
I think in the name of kind of free speech, at least that's what they've said publicly. Enos Cantor, NBA player, speaking out. I just got a book, haven't read it yet. John McWhorter on woke racism, how new
Oh
religion
yeah.
has betrayed Black America. I haven't read it yet, but from
Nice.
what I've seen about him, he's pushing back on certain woke ideas. Do you
Hmm.
sense these are last vestiges before the ship sinks, or is there some momentum that's pushing back against this, and you're still, you know, optimistic about the future?
Yeah, it seems like there's some momentum. It seems like hopefully the pendulum is swinging back the other way a little bit. Now, whether that's too late or not,
Mm,
time will tell. Um, I think with wokeness, or with anything, wokeness will die eventually. It'll fall out of favor, and it'll be something else. I mean, it's the spirit of the age morphs and
mm,
changes to adapt with each culture. Whatever is going to tempt and lure people away from God, that's the form it'll take. So um, wokeness may fall out of favor. I think the battle will continue in some other form. I have hope that it's probably on its way out.
hmm,
I think the problem is, our answer to wokeness is not, Trump. Our answer to wokeness is not in politicians. That's not what's going to save us from all this. What's going to save us from all this is spiritual revival. And
mm,
it's very mundane and very boring looking, because it doesn't look like political revolution or voting for this amazing candidate who's going to solve all the problems. It looks like, sharing the gospel with your neighbor and reading your Bible
mm,
and raising your kids, all that stuff that we all know we're supposed to be doing. And it doesn't seem to be making, that stuff doesn't seem like it's going to make a huge difference in the world, but that's really it. That's what's going to do it.
mm,
And so, if change comes, and we turn this ship around, that's how it will have to come. I think it'll have to be from the
mm.
ground up.
All right, friends, if you're enjoying this, be sure to give us a thumbs up. It helps us with the Matrix. In fact, if you're not enjoying this, still give us a thumbs up.
Yes.
That will help.
Yes. And
Would
leave
be
a
great.
comment. Leave a nasty comment too. That's fine. Just any comment. We need
That, yeah,
activity.
definitely. So Define what's meant by woke. You got a whole book on wokeness. What do you mean, even if there's not a strict definition, like, a Webster definition, what do we mean by wokeness? Because this term's thrown around a lot, and sometimes I
Hmm.
get the sense like maybe we're talking about different things at different times.
Yeah. Okay. So I think wokeness, from the political standpoint, is an attempt to turn America's hatred of racism and bigotry into a hatred of Western capitalism. It's a political lever to try to overthrow,
Hmm.
you know, the the Western system, the Western way of life. So that's the political side. I think more deeply, wokeness is um, kind of a reservoir for people's religious instincts.
Hmm.
As religion has been on the decline um, in America, I think people have been needing something to replace that because people want to know they're doing the right thing. People have this sense that they're flawed and sinful and that there's something wrong with the world and they want to make it better. Um, and without God, without the answers that we have in Scripture, you have to come up with something else, and that's essentially to me what wokeness is. It's an attempt to kind of create a new moral order with scratch or from
Hmm.
scratch. It's a way to assign value to human beings. It's a way to assign value to things and to systems, and it replaces the inherent value, the infinite worth of the human individual with materialistic things. Like your worth comes from your group identity, from how much power you have in society, um, all these outward characteristics. And so that's it's a very dehumanizing philosophy in that sense. It reduces people to their skin color, their sexual orientation, any
Hmm.
number of things. Um, and it's very damaging, I think, to the soul. And it's a
Hmm.
big part of, I think, why people are so angry right now. I mean, they're searching for answers. They're plagued with guilt, and they don't have wokeness is kind of a graceless religion. It's a religion without uh, a a
Hmm.
sacrifice, and so yeah, I think for that reason it's self-defeating. For that reason, I think that there's hope that people could turn away from this and find the truth in Christianity, just so long as Christianity stays true to the scripture
Hmm.
and doesn't fall into wokeness as well.
Now, it sounds like you answered this, but my next question is if you think wokeism is a kind of religion. Because again, in John McWhorter's new book, Woke Racism, he says how a new religion, he calls it a religion. And I think about what it means to have a religion. There's certain saints of wokeism. There's a way that you can sin, doing
Hmm.
things wrong, maybe voting the wrong way, maybe having
Yep.
the wrong skin color,
Yep.
these kinds of things. But then there's also a means of justification.
Hmm.
So would you call it a religion or just say it more functions like a religion or go a different direction with that question?
Yeah, I would call it a religion. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
I guess it would depend on how you define religion. I mean, I guess for a
Sure.
religion, you have to have a deity to worship. Um, I don't know what that would be in wokeism. I mean, humanity, I guess it's kind of self worship in that sense.
Mm,
But yeah, it is, it is, it is a false religion, I would say. Yeah.
mm. What's interesting is Frank Beckwith is a lawyer, and he had a book on law and in evolution, intelligent design, a book probably 12 or 15 years ago. And the Supreme Court, if I remember correctly, someone's probably going to correct me on this, has used the definition of Paul Tillich that says if something functions like a religion, even if it doesn't have belief in the afterlife, even if there's not a deity,
Uh-huh.
legally it could be considered a religion. And if we frame it that way, it sure seems to socially function as a religion does. So
Yeah.
I think we're onto something there. Now, what do you think, if that's true, what do you think wokeism gets right? Because every time I engage a view different than my own, I'm always asking, okay, why do people believe this? What does it
Hmm.
get right? Obviously, it gets certain things right, or nobody would believe it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the appeal for wokeness, particularly with Christians right now, I think is the racial history of America. I think
Mm,
part of what wokeism gets right is the fact that, and this is
mm,
self-evident, that slavery and racism were a grave, horrific sin in America's past, and the the effects of that, and the consequences of that are still felt today and are still
Mm,
hurting people today.
mm,
I think that there is a truth to that wokeness grabs onto, um, and I think it twists that truth. But that I think that part is very, very appealing. I think on like the gender and sexuality side, I think it really appeals to the truth that um, we should be loving and accepting of everyone, right?
mm,
We should be welcoming, we
mm,
should be kind and gracious toward other ways of life and other ways of thinking. And again, it takes that kind of core goodness and perverts it, right?
mm,
It redefines what is accepting. Accepting doesn't just mean to accept someone; it means to affirm that they are correct and to then celebrate their point of view as correct,
mm,
right?
mm,
Um, so I think that's something that we should always remember is that um, in any lie or any damaging ideology, there is a seed of truth to it. There is something real that they're grabbing onto and responding to that I don't think Christians or conservatives should just like ridicule and toss aside. I think the answer to that is to respond to those very real problems a biblical way as opposed to a worldly way.
mm. Great point. Love this interaction. You have this section in the book about wokeism in the church, and obviously there's total exaggeration, like throw out Bibles and use sociology, peer-reviewed studies. And I mean, I laughed
Hmm.
so hard. I shared that one with my wife. Obviously, that blatantly doesn't happen. But what are some signs that would give you pause that, like, okay, wait a minute, I think a church is becoming woke in a way that would concern you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think you kind of have to look for those buzzwords, and it's very subtle. I think talking about justice. Whenever you hear a church talking a lot about justice, justice is good. Justice is biblical, but you have to be very careful to make sure the people who are talking about justice are defining what they mean by justice, because what wokeness has done is it is taken that term justice and completely redefined it. So are we talking about true biblical justice, or are we talking about social justice? Which takes into consideration this whole matrix, this intersectional matrix of oppression, to where treating someone unfairly or oppressing someone could be justice under the social justice definition, as long as you are oppressing or hating the right person, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's the other thing too is talks of whiteness. Whenever you start to hear about whiteness being more than just a skin color and something beyond that, like an entire construct, sociological construct that must be dismantled. My brother was going to a megachurch at his home. He lives on the other side of the country, but he called me up a few months ago and said, my church pastor said that they're going to be having these midweek sessions that are for white people only,
Hmm.
and it's going to be like it's called a whiteness intensive, and we're going to talk about whiteness. Um, and that's when I was like, okay, you got to get out of there, because
Okay.
um, that's when you start to, they're really accepting a lot of the premises of these sociologists that have redefined whiteness, that have redefined justice, and stop talking about individual sin and start talking about systems.
Hmm.
Our enemy is the system. Our enemy is systems of oppression, and it's very hard to pin down. But I think that the important thing for anyone who suspects that their church might be going down that road is to ask questions and make the
Okay.
people define their terms.
And I would also add to that, I think that's wise, but I think there's a lot of people who don't understand the terms and read,
Yeah.
oh, this church is going woke. And I'm like, I don't know that you're paying close enough attention, be careful
It's
not
true.
to kind of disparage somebody's character unnecessarily as well. There's a lot of wisdom that's required from both
Exactly.
sides. So I want
You
to talk
don't want
about
to
your
be you don't want to be a reactionary just because you hear a buzzword.
good, good, good word. So some of the stuff in your book, I mean, you have woke Bible characters, and it says Pharaoh of Egypt. He set up hundreds of compassionate women's healthcare facilities in urban Hebrew areas to help them take care of their firstborn. Um, you have one.
That's how the New York Times would cover that story if they were covering Pharaoh's.
There you go. I saw one. You have all these verses. John 14:2. It says, "In my Father's house there are many genders. I go to prepare a racially segregated safe space for you." Now, if somebody is sensitive, they're probably not going to enjoy the book. But if you're willing to laugh at yourself and certain ideas, there's enough here to give you pause and go like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe they said this." Now, there was one section I read to my wife and I was in tears about how to check a baby for racism. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. I don't know how you guys come up with this stuff, but you don't have to go into those particulars. But tell us, what's the purpose of the book? What could people expect if they get a copy of the book? Why'd you
Yeah.
write it?
Yeah. So it it's a really funny book, and I say that honestly because I got my first few copies from the publisher a few weeks ago, and I was reading through it. I was like, I forgot that we wrote half of this stuff. This is really funny, but it's very hilariously illustrated. We have a great team of graphics guys, and me and Kyle. We wrote the manuscript, and we would kind of, we'd come to breaks in the manuscript and describe what we wanted in a visual joke or a little picture. And these guys they took it above and beyond. So as you're turning through the book, you're pretty much going to be able to turn to any page and find something to laugh at. It's very funny, just on a surface level. There's just a lot of silliness in it. If you want to read it cover to cover, every word of the manuscript, you can do that. Hopefully you'll find a little bit of depth there. I think there is some good information that will really explain to you what wokeness is and how it works if you're willing to go at that level. So it kind of works into it. It's entertaining, hopefully a little bit enlightening. It's for everybody. We hope everyone, of any age gets a kick out of it. I think it'll be a great Christmas gift, a great gag gift. It'll be a great, you bring it to Thanksgiving dinner. You can have a lot of great conversations with your family. But so we just hope everyone has as much fun with it as we had writing it.
Well, it's clear you guys had fun with it. And I think taking it to Thanksgiving dinner is the one thing I would suggest not
don't do that.
doing with this book. But it gives, as a teacher, I was like, I'm going to bring it to my classroom and just share this with my students, get the reaction. Let's talk about it. I mean, why not? We've been working through social justice issues. I teach a high school class part-time, and we've been comparing social justice A with social justice B and talking about all the issues that you cover in this book. And so there's definitely some content for us to laugh at, but also to reflect upon and just compare and contrast. So it's got not only some humorous value, but some educational value as well. If anybody's watching this, I can't imagine you're not following the Babylon Bee. Where do you guys get the most hits? Is it on Instagram? Is it on where is the most attention drawn to what the Babylon Bee does?
Yeah, well, we used to be like 90% Facebook. Almost all of our traffic came from Facebook. During the presidential election of last year, someone somewhere flipped a switch and it just disappeared. So we get very little of our traffic from Facebook now.
Wow.
Not sure how that happened, but we get a lot of traffic from Twitter, some from Instagram. Honestly, most of our traffic, I think, right now is organic. Enough people are fans of the site where they just type us in the search bar and come straight to the site. And that's how we suggest you do it. Don't rely on these big tech guys to decide what you should see. We have a subscription model that's kind of helped to keep us protected as big tech throttles us a little bit. So if you're a subscriber, you can get the headlines fed to your phone, little notifications every once in a while. So organic traffic is where it's at right now.
So if people are enjoying what you do, where can they go to subscribe? And even just a small amount, I know that all adds up and makes a difference. Where could people go to do that if they want to support the efforts?
Yeah, babylonbee.com, upper right hand corner. There's a subscribe button. You can subscribe at several different levels. If you subscribe, in the next few weeks, you can get a copy of this book. We're going to start including this with our subscriptions. Right now, we have this book that we offer with our subscribers. This is the sacred texts of the Babylon
Yeah.
Bee. It's kind of our collection of jokes from the first 2 years of the site. So we try to throw a lot of goodies in there and make it a good value for you. But we just appreciate the support. It helps us keep going and keep writing jokes and making you laugh. So really appreciate it.
All right, babylonbee.com. Check out the Babylon Guide to Wokeness. Joel, this is really fun. Appreciate you coming on and taking some of these just tougher questions I've been curious about. I know a lot of people have been as well. By the way, if you're following this channel and enjoy this, make sure you hit subscribe. Just this morning, we hit 85,000 subscribers. I'm pretty pumped about. This channel is in partnership with Biola Apologetics. If you've ever thought about getting a distance apologetic degree, we're the top-rated distance online program. So there's information below. We'd love to have you. Some shows coming up. Friday, I'm releasing a recent sermon that I gave, one of my favorite sermons, probably of all time, on the book of Acts chapter 17. Specific practical strategies for cultural engagement and sharing your faith from Paul's engagement at Athens. Have an interview coming up with Philip Yancey, one of the authors who has most shaped my life and his story of grace. And have one coming up on new evidences from deathbed experiences, like near-death experiences, but this has not been really published yet. And we're going to have one of the first interviews about how deathbed experiences point towards the afterlife. So, Joel, hang on so I could say goodbye. But everybody, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you real soon.
Thanks.